Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about reported speech. We're going to establish a first contact with this grammar point. So reported speech is also known as indirect speech, as you can see here, and it's a grammar point that requires us to have a good base on verb tenses. You'll see why in a while. So let's get the ball rolling. But first, we need to understand what reported speech really is. As you can see here, reported speech is used when we tell someone what another person has said or has written, as it is the case here. In other words, we're going to use reported speech when we are changing direct into indirect speech. I mean, lo que vamos a aprender a hacer a lo largo de este vídeo es cómo cambiar una oración que está en direct speech o lo que sería igual algo que articulamos, ¿vale? Que sale de nuestra boca o en este caso que yo misma he escrito. Por eso normalmente el direct speech is going to appear between inverted commas, aparecerá entre comillas, y después lo que yo le digo a otra persona. That is the indirect speech. In this case we have an example, okay? The first woman had a conversation with Arnold and Arnold said something like, I love you even more than yesterday. That sentence, the day of the exam, will appear between inverted commas, ¿vale? Aparecerá entre comillas. ¿Por qué entrecomillado? Porque entendemos que es lo que Arnold dijo, ¿vale? The answer that she gave is not important in this case, but this woman decided to tell a friend what Arnold said, ¿vale? Esta mujer decide contarle a su amiga lo que Arnold le había dicho. Y es que cuando yo cuento a otra persona lo que alguien me ha dicho, lo que son la situación espacial y temporal cambia completamente. Por eso, what she's saying is something like, he said, or Arnold said, that, you can insert it or remove it, he loved me more than the day before. So, as you can see here, there are some changes. Let me explain you more in depth. As I mentioned before, there are three main changes. It has to do with tenses, pronouns, and time or place expressions. In the example that I provided before and that we have already reported, we can see the three changes, but this is something that is not always the case. No siempre tengo que hacer cambios en las tres cosas. Hay veces que solo cambio una cosa y no hay ningún problema. Lo que me pida la oración. In this case, we can see first of all how the tense changes. So, from a present simple tense, love, we change it into a past tense. So, when we change tenses into reported speech, it's always like a step backwards, ¿vale? Siempre vamos como un pasito hacia atrás. This is called backshift in English. Then, we are also changing the pronoun. Why? Because the reference changes, so we need to change that as well. And finally, from yesterday that we had in the written message, we are using the day before because the time in this case, as well as the place expressions, also change. So you need to bear in mind that when we work with reported speech in general, there are always three main changes, three different grammatical aspects that need our attention, that require our attention. Thus, let's review the different changes more in detail. First of all, we talked about pronouns. Pronouns change. Why? Because they depend on who says what. They do not always change, no siempre cambian. Hay veces que la referencia se sigue manteniendo y por tanto no hay un cambio de pronombre, pero por lo general tenemos que prestar atención porque es muy probable que cambie. Yet, above all, we mustn't forget about verb tenses. They usually change, and once we have located a verb, it's quite probable that we change it like a step backwards, siempre un pasito hacia atrás. Ahora veremos esta explicación más en detalle, and we need to take into account as well that, as we are going to see now, past perfect and conditional, the conditional tense do not change. Let me explain it to you a bit better. But modal verbs also change, and this is something that we need to learn by heart. It makes sense that if I have something like can, it changes into could, okay? But may changes into might, must into must. It can remain the same or to had to, and then will, as we mentioned before, always into could. So these are the common changes that you need to learn by heart. Hay que aprenderse de memoria todos estos cambios, ¿vale? Aunque al final, pues a través de la práctica lo acabáis interiorizando muy fácilmente. We need to take into account, as I mentioned before, that some modal verbs such as could, would, should, or might do not change. No hay ningún cambio más allá de cualquiera de estos, okay? And apart from that, it is important to notice as well that it is not always compulsory to change sentences into reported speech. Lo más seguro es que de cara al examen, pues obviamente todas las oraciones cambien y mostremos ese cambio. Sin embargo, hay veces que cuando mantenemos la veracidad de una oración, como es el caso de I'm Spanish, es algo que se aplica a mí misma y que yo sigo viva, al menos hasta el momento, como esta oración sigue siendo cierta para mí, yo puedo mantenerla en el mismo tiempo sin hacer un cambio de presente a pasado en este caso. Ya que si yo, en vez de decir Lucía said she's Spanish, y en este caso mantengo la oración como verdadera, I'm still Spanish, I'm still alive, and I still have the Spanish nationality. If I change it into past, si lo cambiase al pasado y dijese algo tipo Lucía said she was Spanish, I would understand something like I'm no longer Spanish, okay, or I passed away or something like that. Cuando lo cambio a pasado, pierde como esa veracidad, es decir, parece que la oración ya está muy lejos y de alguna forma o bien estoy muerta o es que he perdido la nacionalidad española, ¿vale? Con lo cual, en algunos casos excepcionales se podría mantener ese mismo tiempo ya que las oraciones siguen siendo verdaderas en ese mismo momento, ¿ok? This is just an exception, ¿ok? So, something for you, like a kind of curiosity, let's say. Last but not least, time or place expressions together with some demonstrative also change, basically because the reference changes as well. So let me show it to you. This is something that we need to learn by heart, how time and place expressions change. So we need to learn that today changes to that day, now to then, and so on and so forth. You can see that there's no real a correlation, but we can understand that there is a kind of rule in the sense that we are also moving a bit backwards, you know? We're moving back to the past somehow. You mustn't forget that the place also changes, so here changes to there, el aquí pasa allí, porque la referencia cambia completamente, al igual que this pasa a that, y this, que es lo mismo pero para plural, cambia a those. If I have a sentence such as, I don't know, I like this, me gusta esto, cuando yo se lo cuento a otra persona, sería algo tipo, Lucía dijo, ya lo cambio a pasado, que le gustaba eso. Ya no es esto, ya no es lo mismo, okay? So you need to take into account all of these, learn it by heart, and pay a lot of attention when doing exercises. Now, let me finish by summarizing everything. All in all, you must pay attention to the change in the verb. Remember this back shift, este pasito hacia el pasado. The change into pronouns and the change of time or place expressions. Here you can see an example. Perhaps in the exam, I give you something like, Lisa said, I have a test tomorrow. When we change that into reported speech, es decir, pasamos de esa directa a la indirecta, I am saying something like Lisa said that, que ese that se puede meter o no, en español es obligatorio, pero en inglés no lo es. Sí, I'm changing the pronoun had, so from present into past, and a test that is just the same the following day. Podéis ver cómo el orden no se altera en ningún momento, lo único que tengo que prestar atención a todos los posibles cambios. En caso de que tengáis algún problema, recordad que tenéis el PDF con la chuleta de todos los posibles cambios. Once the changes are clear, like the main changes, we need to understand that there are different types of sentences. Es decir, una vez que ya sabemos los cambios principales que se aplican en el 90% de los casos, vamos a lidiar con diferentes tipos de oraciones. Es decir, de cara al examen no solo tendremos que hacer los cambios que veamos oportunos, sino también localizar el tipo de oración que tengo, ya que tal y como vamos a ver, cada tipo de oración va a tener una estructura distinta. And now let me introduce you to the different types of sentences. Here you can see the three main types of sentences that you can find the day of the exam and also in future exercises. We've been working with statements, ¿vale? Ya hemos trabajado con los statements, los cambios más comunes y el tipo de oración más común. Hablamos de oraciones enunciativas, tanto afirmativas como negativas. Then we are also going to work with questions or interrogative sentences, and finally we're going to work with commands, requests, and orders. Here you can see some examples, but we're going to be working with each of them in depth. So, first of all, statements. They are the most common and the easiest type of reported speech, let's say, or reported sentence. As we've been seeing since the very beginning of the presentation, there are three main changes. We're going to change pronouns, we're going to change the verb tense, always remember this kind of backshift, and we're going to change as well the place and the time expressions. So, let me illustrate it by means of different examples. So here you can see three different lyrics from different songs, okay? It's true that if we follow these kinds of exceptions that I explained before, we can keep the sentences as they are, in the sense that they are going to be still part of a lyric. Las podríamos mantener tal cual porque tendría sentido mantenerlas, es decir, mantendríamos esa veracidad de lo que es la letra de la canción. Pero en este caso la vamos a intentar cambiar a reported speech, siguiendo los pasos que hemos visto anteriormente, so that we can practice a little bit. Do not forget that we use reported speech when we are somehow saying something to another person, okay? So I give you just like some text to try to change it, and I'll show it to you in a while. And these are the solutions. You can see how in green I presented the pronoun change, and in pink the verb tenses and how they change. In the first lyrics we had a present simple and it changes into past. And in the other two occasions we mainly have how past simple, the tense that appeared in the lyrics, changes into past perfect. En esas dos oraciones podéis ver que hay más de un cambio. Y es que en el reported speech, si tenemos pues más de un verbo, cambiarían todos los verbos, a pesar de que alguno aparezca en infinitivo, como es el caso de to make in the second lyrics, ¿ok? Como tendríamos una oración subordinada, pues cambiarían todos los verbos que veamos convenientes, que han de cambiar, al igual que se aplicaría de la misma forma todos los pronombres y expresiones de tiempo y de lugar. Now, moving on, questions or interrogative sentences. Here you can see that as it happened with pronouns, everything changes. Todo cambia de nuevo. Vuelvo a cambiar pronombres, vuelvo a cambiar el tiempo verbal, and I change as well the place and the time expressions. Let me illustrate it a bit better. So, when dealing with questions, the most important thing is to distinguish between yes or no questions and WH questions. On the one hand, yes or no questions are these kinds of questions that do not only start with an auxiliary verb, siempre van a empezar con un have, con un do, con un did, even with a modal verb, but the main answer is going to be yes or no. On the other hand, a WH question is a question that is started by a WH pronoun, ¿vale? Se aparecería, a pesar de que tiene un auxiliar, ahí vemos ese did, van a empezar con una palabra de WH, que va a ser crucial, esencial, para poder crear la oración. Dicho esto, if we have the question, have you ever thought about traveling to Thailand? ¿Alguna vez has pensado en viajar a Tailandia? Si yo tuviese que reportar eso, que contarle eso a otra persona, en español lo haría, él me preguntó si yo había pensado no sé qué, no sé cuánto. Es decir, ese sí, we do it with if, with the same if that we used with conditionals. It is true that we can also say whether, we'll see it, but the question at the end ends by saying something like, he asked me if I had ever thought about traveling to Thailand. ¿Ok? Lo importante aquí no es solo que meteríamos ese if, igual que haríamos en español, sino que tenemos una inversión, y es decir, de alguna forma la oración, la pregunta, perdón, desaparece, y creo, en vez de una pregunta directa con su signo de interrogación, creo una pregunta indirecta, donde tanto el signo de interrogación desaparece, como el orden de la oración. Sabéis que cuando hacemos preguntas en inglés siempre hay esta inversion, ¿ok? Siempre el auxiliar se pondría delante del sujeto y demás, pero como en este caso hacemos una pregunta indirecta y estoy metiendo una oración enunciativa que para nada es una oración interrogativa, voy a tener el orden de las oraciones enunciativas, es decir, un sujeto y un verbo y todo lo demás, ¿vale? Por eso las preguntas suelen crear bastante problemas porque solemos mantener el auxiliar delante del sujeto y para nada va a ser así. We can see the same with WH questions. When did you start traveling abroad? Cuando empezaste a viajar al extranjero. He asked me when. Él me preguntó cuándo. Yo empecé no sé qué, no sé cuánto, ¿vale? Entonces, he asked me when I had started traveling abroad. En este caso, en vez de poner un if que aparece de la nada, lo que hago es mantener la palabra de WH que me viene en la WH question. Siempre va a ser la misma. Y al igual que nos ocurría en la oración anterior, aquí sí que no hay ningún tipo de cambio, el sujeto va por delante, ¿vale? Tengo un sujeto, tengo un verbo y todo lo demás. Y por supuesto desaparece el signo de interrogación. Let me show you the formula. So, here's the formula. Basically, we need to distinguish, as I was saying, between yes-no questions and WH questions. On the one hand, yes-no questions are going to be reported with the, let's say, ping structure. So, he asked, it's usually asked. Normalmente solemos tener el verbo asked, preguntar. If or whether, que no es el weather del tiempo atmosférico, sino un weather que significa lo mismo que if, pero es mucho más formal. And then we have the subject and the verb. Vuelvo a repetir, ese sujeto y ese verbo, por favor. Then, with WH questions, we have something like, basically, well, the structure is somehow the same, but the main change, as we can see in green, is that we insert the WH word that they give us in the question. So, this said, let me review it a bit more. All in all, once the formula is understood, we need to take into account the following, that we are transforming the direct question into an indirect one. Estamos haciendo un cambio de algo directo a indirecto, ¿vale? Es decir, desaparece ese signo de pregunta. And that we need to distinguish between yes-no questions and WH questions. Remember that at the very end, what we are reported is not a real question, but rather a statement. And that's the main reason why the question mark disappears. Last but not least, in the third type of sentences, we have commands, orders, and requests. We shouldn't forget that in this case, we are also changing pronouns and place and time expressions in the same way we did before. But there's a change, and it's that we are not going to change in any way the verb tense. No vamos a cambiar de ninguna forma el tiempo verbal en base a la tabla que os he presentado anteriormente, pero sí que va a haber un leve cambio, hay una especie de fórmula para trabajar con estas órdenes o peticiones formales. So, let me show it to you. Yet, before working with commands, orders, and so on and so forth more in depth, the first thing that we need to distinguish is affirmative and negative sentences. En este caso, que la oración sea afirmativa, bueno, la orden sea afirmativa o negativa, sí que va a ser de vital importancia, ya que si mi oración es algo como shut up and stop talking, okay, I'm going to make it in one way, but if the sentence is don't speak that loud, I will create it in a different way. And this is the solution. The teacher ordered us to shut up and stop talking when the sentence is affirmative, es decir, utilizaríamos ese to más el infinitivo, pero sin embargo, cuando la oración es negativa, I create something like the teacher ordered us not to speak that loud. Let me as well point out that even though in these two examples we have the verb ordered, a pesar de que tengamos el verbo ordenar, mandar, normalmente este tipo de oraciones, los commands, orders, and so on and so forth, are usually introduced by means of the verb told. So the teacher told us to or not to. And this is the formula to deal with verb tenses. So we need to distinguish between affirmative and negative sentences so that we introduce them with to plus the infinitive form of the verb or not to plus the infinitive form of the verb if it's a negative sentence. And this is a fast review of the three main types of sentences. So statements are the most common ones and there are changes in everything. Había cambios en absolutamente todo, siempre y cuando me apareciese en la oración. En el caso de las preguntas, I need to distinguish, remember, between yes or no questions and WH questions, and remember this inversion, how the subject appears before the verb and there's no question mark at the end. Then, last but not least, commands, requests, and orders. As I mentioned a step before, we need to introduce them with to and not to, plus the infinitive form of the verb. This said, it's time to practice. And yes, this is the typical example. Here you can see different sentences that are combined. We can see how statements, questions, and commands appear together. So take your time, try to do everything, and then we check it together. So, as a way to work with this exercise, and supposing you've already done it, we need to, first of all, be able to distinguish the different types of sentences. Tenemos que saber por encima de todo el tipo de oración al que nos estamos enfrentando, ¿vale? Para ello, pues es muy fácil entender unas u otras. Sabemos que los statements suelen tener al principio ese sujeto, verbo y todo lo demás. Las preguntas pues tienen signos de interrogación y lo que viene siendo órdenes suelen aparecer con el infinitivo delante, tal y como podemos ver en las oraciones 4, 5 y 6, por ejemplo. De esta forma, una vez que sabemos eso, tenemos que tener en cuenta los cambios que tenemos que llevar a cabo. Y dicho esto, pues let's get the ball rolling. The first sentence is John said, I loved this time. John said that he loved that time. Acordaros de ese this que es muy problemático y siempre se nos olvida cambiarlo a that, but it's necessary, okay? Do you like soccer? He asked me. He asked me if I liked soccer because it's a yes-no question, okay? I can't drive a lorry, he said. He said that he couldn't drive a lorry. El resto de la oración no cambia y no hay ningún problema, ¿vale? Be nice to your brother, he said. He asked me to be nice to my brother. The big problem here is that we find something like asked. Decimos como, uy, es que me ponen de repente asked y yo no tengo una pregunta. Claro, tenemos que tener en cuenta, tal y como veremos en otros vídeos, que ask no es solo preguntar, sino también pedir. En este caso, pues sería pedir y por tanto lo introducimos como una orden. Al ser afirmativa, pues con to. Sin embargo, on sentence number 5, don't be nasty, he said. He urged me not to be nasty, and something similar happens in Don't Waste Your Money, she said. She told the boys not to waste their money. Ahí lo podéis ver. En el siguiente vídeo veremos también cómo trabajar con suggested, que es el ejercicio, bueno, la oración que tenemos ahí al principio, al igual que cómo trabajar con los diferentes verbos, con said, con told, advised, wanted to know, and all these kinds of things. So I really recommend you to watch the next one so that you can understand everything better. Now, moving to sentence number 7, what have you decided to do? She asked him what he had decided to do. I always wake up early, he said. He said that he always woke up early. You should revise your lessons, he said. She advised the students to revise their lessons, okay? Be careful with this one because we are somehow getting rid of you should. Nos deshacemos de you should. ¿Por qué? Porque ya está integrado en ese verbo. Es decir, advise, que es aconsejar, ya de alguna manera tiene esa carga semántica o ese significado de, pues deberías hacer algo. This is where I mentioned that I will explain in the video dealing with the different types of verbs. And finally, where have you been? He asked me. He wanted to know where I had been, okay? This said, if we are working with the sentence above, the teacher suggested, it must be the teacher suggested practicing or that we should practice, but I will explain that in the later video. And well, now this is the end of this video lesson, and after watching this, you must be able to report without any kind of problem. I mean, to change from a direct into an indirect sentence, and to be able to classify as well the different type of sentences, you know, or this direct statement that they give us in an exercise or in an exam into a statement, question, and command, and be able to report it in an appropriate way according to the different rules that I have explained throughout this video. This said, remember that you'll find some extra practice in the description of this video, and I'll always be available via email in case you have further types. This said, have a lovely day and see you soon.